Okay, again, good morning, good afternoon, good night, wherever you're at. This is going to be essentially the fifth webinar. And if you're seeing that slide, again, this is based on module 3, the fifth webinar, and we're again focusing on the effects of subjective reality on well-being. Again, we're following the book, and very specifically, we're discussing chapters 9 through 15. Again, focusing on the subjective reality and its effects on happiness. And the topics that we're covering so far, we covered personality effects on well-being, the effects of affect and cognition on well-being. And today we're going to start from the effects of beliefs and values, and then this will be followed by the effects of needs and need satisfaction. And then we'll talk about goals and self-concept and social comparison. I hope we'll be able to finish all of this because, again, the research is tremendous. It's very substantial, and there's so much to talk about. Okay, so this is what we've done so far. Again, we talked about personality, and we talked about, in terms of the effects of personality as neuroticism and extroversion, the effects of self-esteem on well-being, affective disposition, character strength, and other personality traits, as well as we discussed personality theories of well-being, from instrumental theory, temperament theory, top-down theory, set point theory, genotype theory of happiness, dynamic equilibrium theory, homeostatically protected mood theory. These are the ones that we briefly discussed. And then we started talking about affect and cognition, and in that context, the effects of affect and cognition on various measures of well-being and the research related to that. So in that context, we talked about mood, causal attribution, appraisal, rational emotive therapy, meaning to life, habituation, cognitive frames, multiple discrepancy theory. I don't think we got a chance to finish those, but again, this is, in terms of cognitive outlooks, I mentioned the fact that, there's so much research on mindfulness, gratitude, optimism, self-esteem, autonomy, locus of control, competence and connectedness, attributional style, ruminative style, and character strength. These are essentially, that research provides the foundation for what some of you might be interested in positive psychology and positive psychology interventions. And so that kind of research essentially builds or provides the foundation for much of the research in positive psychology intervention. So let's say, for example, like gratitude intervention for to get people to engage in forgiveness, for example, or loving kindness, or mindfulness. All of these are positive psychology intervention, and the research behind all of these interventions is based on these cognitive outlooks. Okay, so today we're going to start talking about beliefs and values. And in that context, again, we'll be talking about the effect of generalized beliefs on well-being, as well as values, personal values, as well as cultural values. So let's start out with generalized beliefs. The idea is that we have, in our minds, we have certain generalized. Remember last time we talked about how people become depressed, and the basis for cognitive behavioral therapy, and the basis for cognitive behavioral therapy is very much to tackle what psychologists have been referring to as cognitive distortions. And these are irrational beliefs, right? So the idea is that, a person who thinks that everybody should should love him or her is a sort of an unrealistic belief. It's an irrational belief, right? And that causes people, says, if anybody out there who doesn't like me, that means I'm no good. I'm not likable. I'm not lovable. And therefore that causes the person to feel angst, to feel depressed. Ultimately, it leads to depression. And the focus of cognitive behavioral therapy is to be able to change this kind of irrational thinking, or the evoking of those irrational beliefs that ultimately lead to those negative feelings. The same thing can be said in relation to positive beliefs, and this is what we're talking about: the effects of positive views. So when you see the world in rosy terms and positive terms, it's very likely to affect your self-esteem. You have a little bit more control over the environment. So it builds what you might call an internal locus of control. It builds your sense of mastery. And that ultimately helps you when you feel more confident about what you can do in order to enhance yourself as well as others, those people that you care about. Ultimately, the actions lead to successful goal attainment, and goal attainment, the achievement of those goals, lead to positive affect, ultimately lead to satisfaction in domains, ultimately leading to satisfaction in life, and so forth. So, there's quite a bit of evidence to suggest that a positive outlook on life and those positive beliefs that a person may have leads to well-being. So it becomes foundational. Another topic in the psychology of well-being is trust. I tend to think of trust. If we don't trust, what do we do? We trust in others. You trust in people that you know, family member. You trust your friends to do the right things, to stand by you, and not stab you in the back, so to speak. You trust institutions. You trust your educational institution. You trust university. Colleges. You trust your government. You trust businesses that you transact with. That kind of trust is literally the oil of the machine that we call society. The oil, the grease that helps a society grind its wheels. Without trust, literally, everything is grounded to a halt, because trust becomes the basis, the sort of the social fabric, the oil of the societal machine, so to speak. So there's quite a bit of evidence to suggest that trust in institutions and trust in others plays a very significant role in well-being, in the psychology of well-being, of course. So having said that, let's go on to talk about forgiveness and gratitude. Now, you think in terms of forgiveness and gratitude as action. Well, yes, they are action in the sense that you forgive a person, you express gratitude. Okay, yes, but there are underlying cognitions, underlying beliefs that prompt a person to engage in this kind of action. Like, for example, to forgive other people, to express gratitude. So what are those beliefs that make people forgive and express gratitude? One kind of belief that you can probably relate to is To err is human. To err is human, meaning to make mistakes is being human. All of us as human beings, one time or another, in some situation or another, make mistakes. Yes, we err, right? So if you had a very fundamental core belief of that erring, making mistakes is part of being who you are as a human being, it's very likely that would lead you to express feelings of forgiveness and act on those feelings. That's a belief that leads to forgiveness, right? Because if people make mistakes, you forgive them. Well, everybody makes mistakes, right? That's a fundamental core belief that leads you to engage in actions related to forgiveness. The same thing with gratitude. Gratitude. You express gratitude to people. Let's say maybe you're a boss at work, and if you believe that that people, meaning employees, have to do their job perfectly, meaning that they cannot make mistakes. Mistakes are unforgivable. Mistakes, people who make mistakes are fired, right? They are let go from their jobs. If you're that kind of person, of course, you'll not like to express gratitude. But on the other hand, if you understand that people make mistakes and there are situational factors, personality factors, cultural factors, and a whole bunch of multitude of factors that lead to people making mistakes, and understanding those factors would allow you to, again, be thankful or express gratitude when employees, do the right thing. So saying thank you, there is a sort of an underlying belief that, again, people can make mistakes, but because they don't make mistakes in those kinds of situations for those kinds of occasions, then we should be thankful. We should be thankful, right, for those occasions. That's a fundamental belief that drives us to express gratitude. The effects of political persuasion. Now, that's kind of an interesting topic. What do we mean by political persuasion? Well, I mean, in one way, you can actually think in terms of people's orientation and what do they believe in terms of the effectiveness of any kind of political system. So, on the political spectrum, from being a right winger, so to speak, you have beliefs that are very much related to the right wing of the political spectrum versus the left wing of the political spectrum. The left wing of the political spectrum, of course, is grounded in communism or a high level of socialism, right? And on the very right of the political spectrum, you're really believing that the best system is capitalism, is a political economy that people should be left alone and let people do whatever that they want to do and let the market, in essence, take care of things, right? Because these are beliefs that form ideologies, political ideology. So the idea is that for those people who are on the right or the left, do they experience subjective well-being? And the research suggests that those people are somewhat in the middle of the political spectrum. They are essentially pro-democracy, pro-market, but not extreme, right? They're not leftist, they're not rightist, right? So they're either centrist or maybe center right, center left. Nevertheless, they realize that they have certain beliefs of the political of the political economy being most effective when you have a government that regulates the marketplace, and there are certain rights that needs to be upheld and protected by government. And we need to have laws and norms, societal norms that, in essence, that would reflect this this kind of ideology, a centrist kind of ideology, with a bit of left-leaning or right-leaning. That's fine. But if you're all the way to the right and or all the way to the left, it's very likely that you'll experience much more ill-being than well-being. I think in terms of the, people are very much extreme leftists. They're so, I was about to say hung up. Maybe that's not the right word. But people on the very extreme left, they tend to believe that inequality, for example, inequality is really bad. And therefore, love and brotherhood is definitely a good thing, and we should all strive to be equal, right? Well, if a person sees the world as inequality being bad, any form of inequality, whether it is economic inequality or otherwise, they tend to see a lot more injustice in the world. And these feelings of injustice kind of spills over into feelings of ill-being, life dissatisfaction, that kind of thing. Well, the same thing with people on the very extreme right, where they think that government is evil and any kind of government is an infringement on personal rights. They tend to also see any action by government is being evil, right? And if they make those inferences continuously and frequently, then that generates feelings of ill-being. So extreme right, extreme left tend to be associated with feelings of ill-being, while again, people in the middle, centrist, center right, center left, tend to have a lot more realistic view of how society works. And ultimately that becomes the basis for allowing you to experience opportunities leading to life satisfaction, well-being, positive affect, and so forth. Questions so far? Let me see. Okay, if you have any questions, put in the chat room so I'm checking once in a while. Religious beliefs. Now that's another kind of very interesting, a lot of research that suggests that people who have, strong religious beliefs, let me say, well, strong, maybe not the right word, religious beliefs tend to experience higher levels of well-being than those people who don't have religious beliefs. Well, that's kind of strange. Because, you think, those people who have very strong religious beliefs, they tend to do crazy stuff. Well, excuse my pun. But let's talk about the research. And the research suggests that they are mediating factors. Those people who have religious beliefs, they tend to, let's say, for example, they go to a mosque, they go to a church, they go to a temple, and by engaging in religious activities, if you have those religious beliefs, then that kind of enhances your sense of social well-being, because there's quite a bit of fellowship when you go to a mosque or a temple or a church, right? And engage with others. There's a sense of camaraderie. There's a sense of solidarity. There's a sense of belongingness, right? A sense of belonging that comes along with engaging in these religious rituals, right? And the social support that one gets from engaging in those religious activities as a function of the religious beliefs tend to produce feelings of well-being. Make sense? Okay. Then we have effects of social axioms. This is sort of a new area of research, but maybe I shouldn't really get into it. But let me just give you an example of a social axiom. These are sort of a generalized beliefs about the world, of how they view the world, and I'm looking at, for example, examples of axioms would be reward for application. Like adversity can be overcome by effort. Now that would be a sort of a measurement item that captures reward for application. That means you believe that if you apply yourself, ultimately you'll become rewarded by exerting, by effortful activities. Social cynicism. Social cynicism, an example of an item would be kind-hearted people usually suffer losses. That means if you're a kind person, then you're likely, people will take advantage of you, and therefore you'll end up losing much more than you're gaining. Well, if that becomes the basis of what you call social cynicism, because that's the underlying belief. And if you believe that, it's very likely that you will approach people and do things in such a way that, again, would reflect what we call avoidance rather than approach behavior. Avoidance, what do we mean by avoidance? That means you will do things out of fear that, again, people will take advantage of you. So you'll try to protect yourself. You'll try and move away from people. You'll try to not, because you don't trust people, you will not transact with people. You'll not engage. You'll not interact, and therefore that's avoidance. And the avoidance aspect of leads to ill-being rather than well-being. Approach behaviors tend to lead to well-being more than ill-being. Hopefully that makes sense. So the question is from Canoe, in comparison to religious beliefs, what is the impact of spirituality on well-being? Spirituality is viewed, it is construed as a much expansive concept than religious. Religious beliefs are grounded in the idea that there is a divine force. There is a God or gods that manipulate, that control our destinies. Spirituality is a little bit different. It is not necessarily, oh, no, let me qualify that. And then, religious beliefs are essentially grounded in religion. Religion is different from spirituality, somewhat. Spirituality is a broader concept that may include religion, but it is much more expansive in the sense that let me give you an example. In the United States, we have a denomination. Actually, it's sort of it used to be a Christian denomination, but it became a denomination that embraces a lot more of all kinds of religious denominations. And that's Universalist church, universalism. I'm not sure whether you might be familiar with the Unitarian Church, but now the Unitarian Church has sort of consolidated with the Universalist Church, and again, the word church is a misnomer in the sense that it is not accurate in the way it is not meaningful as such, because we're not talking about because when we talk about church, we're talking about Christianity, and that's where we're off track. So universalism, people who believe in universalism, they believe in creationism, which is that there is a force out there, but it is not the kind of force, excuse me, turn off my mobile phone. But it's not the kind of force that reflects God in the image of what Christians view as God, or what Jews would construe as God, what Muslims construe as God, what Buddhists construe as the divine. It's a force, it's a divine force that it may be nature. Some universally call nature is essentially the divine force, and the force of nature is universalist. And for those people who are so much into nature and believe that nature is the entity, is the deity that controls things, well, you're spiritual. So that's part of spirituality. So spirituality is a much bigger umbrella of beliefs dealing with forces, divine forces. And yes, there is some evidence to suggest that spiritual people are also, as the religious people, experience a high level of well-being than others, than those people who they don't have those kinds of beliefs. Kenu? Where are you? Oh, there you are. Do you feel comfortable with that answer? Okay. Values. Let's talk about values. So what are values? Well, there's so many conceptualization of personal values and cultural values. If you have the book, on page 251, there is a measure of value orientation. Family values, for example. Family values, materialism, societal consciousness, status consciousness, traditionalism, these are values. So again, people who have family values, for example, they put so much value, so much importance on the concept of family, and everything about society has to enhance family and family makeup and family togetherness, right? So a typical measure, a typical social survey measure or item to capture family values with family love makes a person feel appreciated and treasured. Family members should communicate openly and honestly with each other. one should strive to provide the best for one's children. These are beliefs, ultimately values that reflect a family orientation. Materialism, on the other hand, would be something like, if I had to choose having more money or leisure, I would choose money. Money can solve most people's problems. Financial security is very important to me, that kind of thing. Societal consciousness would be, I'm interested to know how I can improve the welfare of others in my country, right? So again, societal consciousness. Status consciousness, on the other hand, I usually look out for well-known brands that reflect my status in life. Traditionalism, being very traditional in your beliefs and ultimately values. It is wrong to have sex before marriage. So that's premarital sex is unacceptable. That's being very traditional, right? So the research on those values is some values tend to be related to well-being. Other values are not. Can you think in terms of, which of those tend to be most related to well-being? Family values tend to be related to well-being, positive well-being, meaning well-being, not ill-being. Materialism, on the other hand, there's quite a bit of evidence, and we'll talk about that. Maybe we can talk about it now. For those people who are highly materialistic, meaning they value so much material things, money, for example, and material possessions, there is a negative correlation between materialism and well-being. Now, you tend to think, why would that be? Actually, I've done quite a bit of research on materialism and well-being, and some of the research that I've done and with my colleagues focus on how materialistic people, those people who score highly on materialistic measures, tend to have unrealistic beliefs about their standard of living. That means they have those expectations, those aspirations. I want to become filthy rich. I want to become filthy rich. I want to be rich, right? And they may not necessarily have what it takes in order to become rich. So they have unrealistic expectations of of becoming rich. And maybe these expectations are developed or they're socialized through, again, a culture, a media, let's say, for example, watching television advertising. And every time you watch people in a very nice house with all the luxuries and the material possession that reflects a luxury lifestyle. And then you tend to think that, hey, this is the standard of living that I should aspire to, right? So in essence, you're cultivating those kinds of expectations. And it's not necessarily grounded in the fact that you have the educational background, the financial background, and all what it takes in order to get you to achieve this level of luxury or luxury consumption. So people tend to cultivate those beliefs based on socialized experiences that may be unrealistic. So those people who have unrealistic expectation in terms of their standard of living, they tend to express dissatisfaction with their standard of living. meaning their material well-being, their economic well-being. And economic well-being feeds into life satisfaction. So those people who are dissatisfied with their economic life or financial life tend to spill over into making judgments about their lives being, they're not happy with their lives. So that spills to what you might call life dissatisfaction. So that sort of gives you an idea of that kind of research dealing with materialism. And materialism is very much related to status consciousness. Those people who are very materialistic tend to also be very status conscious. And again, they have inflated, unrealistic expectation in relation to their status in life, which again makes those when they make those kinds of judgments, they feel dissatisfied with themselves, with their status, ultimately their status in life, which leads to life dissatisfaction. Let me move on to talk about the Schwartz values. Schwartz values is a model, is more like a theory that is grounded in cultural psychology. And there's so many people in doing well-being research that have used the Schwartz values model, as well as the measurement that again, Professor Schwartz has developed over the years. And these values are related to achievement, power, status, security, conformity, tradition, benevolence, universalism, self-direction, and stimulation. And in the book, I have a table on page 253, and it shows that for those people who place a lot of value on, for example, achievement, they tend to be motivated to achieve certain goals. And these motivational goals would be personal success or demonstrating competence according to social standards. For those people who place a lot value on power, for example, the motivational goals will be social status and prestige, control or dominance over people and resources. Those people who play, much emphasis or value on security would be, the goals that they try to achieve would be safety, harmony, and stability of society, of relationships, of self. These are what you call the motivational goals, on and on. So what is the research telling us? The research is telling us that there are certain values that tend to be healthy and others tend to be unhealthy. Healthy values are the ones that lead to well-being. Unhealthy values lead to ill-being. Can you guess which ones lead to well-being and which ones lead to ill-being? Well, the research suggests that things like achievement, self-direction, benevolence, stimulation, these are the kinds of values that are healthy because it leads people to achieve good things in life, ultimately feeding into the sense of well-being. But on the other hand, being hung up on power and status and security and conformity and tradition, these are the kinds of values that, again, lead people to experience more ill-being than well-being. Why? Well, one possibility, one mediating mechanism is related to the distinction between growth needs and basic needs. Are you familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs? Growth needs would be things like the need for esteem, the need for self-actualization, the need for beauty and aesthetics, the need for knowledge. On the other hand, basic needs are very much related to physiological needs, need for security. Um, 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 so basic needs are very much related to, those values that we're calling unhealthy, like security. If you place too much value on security or status or power or conformity, tradition, these are basic needs. And basic needs only can, does not necessarily produce, when you're satisfied with your basic needs, it doesn't necessarily produce positive emotions. The best it can do is suppress negative feelings. It makes you okay, not necessarily happy. So if you're economically or financially secure, the best that you can feel is, well, I'm not dissatisfied with my financial situation, which is a good thing, but it doesn't give me a sense of flourishing, right? Again, flourishing types of feelings are very much, they emanate from growth, the satisfaction of growth needs rather than basic needs. So this is sort of a theoretical interpretation of how those values can lead to the sense of well-being or ill-being. Okay, I'm going to move on because again, we have so much to talk about needs and need satisfaction. And as you can see from the slide, there is so many models that have been used in well-being research dealing with needs and need satisfaction. So we have, from needs for having, loving, and being all the way down to fundamental motives and life history. Let's talk about that. We already talked about Maslow's, right? So that may sort of give you sort of a foundational understanding of what we're getting into right now. So the idea here is by the psychologist by name of Allard, is that in order to experience well-being, you need to have the full spectrum of needs satisfied. But what are these? What's the full spectrum of needs? Needs can be classified in terms of having, loving, and being. Having, loving, and being. So we have having needs such as, we need economic resources, financial resources. We need to have a shelter. We need to have a roof over our heads. These are essentially housing conditions, right? We have to live in a house that it's not falling apart, right? Housing, that's very basic. It's having needs. We need to have a job, employment. We need to have decent working conditions. We need to have a job that, in essence, allow us to work, under conditions that are at least safe, right? Physically safe, if not mentally too. We need to have health, good health. We have to have education. These are having needs. Loving needs, on the other hand, needs to relate to other people and form social identities, obviously. And then, of course, the last but not least would be being needs. And that these are needs for integration into society and to live in harmony with nature. That's being, right? So the idea is that if you have all those needs satisfied, at least moderately satisfied, then it's very likely that you'll experience well-being much more so than ill-being. On the other hand, or conversely, if many of those needs are not satisfied, right, it's very likely that you'll experience ill-being rather than well-being. So that's that model, and there's some research, that substantiates this model. We have also a model dealing with being, belonging, and becoming. And again, the same kind of thing being is a person with high quality of life, is one who is physically, mentally, and spiritually healthy. That's being, which is again a very different conception from Allard's view of those different needs. So again, different scholars have classified those needs very differently, but the very fundamental notion or the tenet that's guiding this kind of research is that, you need to satisfy those needs collectively in the aggregate in order to experience a sense of well-being. Let me give you talk about Maslow's. What's the right word I'm looking for? I and my colleagues have worked with Maslow's theory of needs on several fronts. One, many years ago, you see that as a Sergi et al., 1995. Back in the 1990s, we developed a measure of well-being based on Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So the idea is that if your physiological needs, if your safety needs, if your esteem needs, if your self-actualization needs, if your needs for beauty and aesthetics and art and creativity, all of these are satisfied, then it's very likely that you will score highly on global measures of happiness or well-being. And this is sort of the measure that we came up with, and we were able to validate it through a bunch of different studies. The feeling of having been secure, the feeling of having given to and received from others, the feeling of having developed close friendships, the feeling of having been in the know on knowledge needs, that kind of thing, on and on. So that sort of gives you an idea of at least a program of research dealing with Maslow's hierarchy of needs and how it relates to the sense of well-being. Max Neef's theory of human scale development is another theory, a theoretical model that has been well propagated in well-being research. And if you have the book, and if you turn to page 268, I have a table 12.3, and it lists all those needs. And the idea is that, again, you experience human development, and in that context, again, a greater sense of well-being, especially in the eudaimonic sense. In the eudaimonic sense, if you have all of those needs satisfied. So we have subsistence needs, protection needs, affection needs, understanding needs, participation needs, idleness needs, creation needs, identity needs, and freedom needs. So Max Neef, who is essentially the originator of the human scale development model, talks about how these needs are satisfied. And he breaks down those satisfiers, he calls them satisfiers, in terms of being, having, and doing, and the interaction of all of these. So let me give you an example. In relation to subsistence needs, you need to be being healthy, and you need to adapt to the environment, right? That's being adaptive and being healthy. When it comes to a satisfier related to having, it would be that you work, that you have shelter, you have work to do, right? That would be having, and having these things tend to lead to the satisfaction of what you call subsistence needs. Doing, eating, procreating, working, again, these are things that you do in order to satisfy subsistence needs. So he's got, again, a full table and a full model based on the idea of how do you go about satisfying all these needs. And again, satisfying all these needs lead to what he calls human scale development, which is well-being. Well, another word for it would be well-being. Questions about Max Neef's human scale development theory? Oh, I have 2 questions in the chat room. From TC, Sung Chi Cheng, that's void in Buddhism, which means to be completely indifferent to worldly temptations. Sung Chi, would you tell us a little bit more of what you have in mind? If you can unmute yourself and show yourself, that would be great.
I just answered the question from the above for Buddhism from Dusati, who said for Buddhism, I think not attached to any value will bring happiness, which what I say is to try to reply to his statement.
I'm not exactly sure what you mean.
Okay. It's all right.
Okay. I'm sorry.
Dr. Sergi, look at the question right before it. They were answering that question in the chat.
For Buddhism, I think not attached to any values will bring happiness. Okay. That's kind of interesting because, yeah, when it comes to the psychology of mindfulness practices based on Buddhist practices, suspending judgment is definitely part of mindfulness practices, which emanates from Buddhist practices. Yeah, it makes sense. Yeah, I concur. So let's see. Dasari, I'm sorry, I'm mispronouncing. Dasari is the one who made that comment. And yes, I think it makes sense. Thank you. Any more questions? The need for self-determination. Now, this is a theory in the psychology of well-being that has become very, very popular and amassed so much research in both personality psychology, social psychology, as well as the psychology of well-being. And the idea is that there are basic psychological needs, basic psychological needs. And these psychological needs are the need for competence, the need for autonomy, and the need for relatedness. So the need for competence is that, there is an inherent need that drives us, and that is we need to exert control over our environment. We need to control our destiny, right? And in order to do this, we have to be competent in doing what we have to do to achieve that kind of goal. So the need for competence. The need for autonomy says that we are human beings and we are individual, and therefore we are autonomous in the sense that we make our own decisions, and making our own decisions would pave way to to achieving certain life goals that is of our making, that we chose those life goals autonomously without, for example, pressure, social pressure from our family, from extended family members, from friends and associates, from the community, and so forth. So we make those decisions autonomously. And if we achieve those goals that are set autonomously, right, without duress, so to speak, then that kind of contributes to our sense of well-being. And the same thing with relatedness. Relatedness is that we need to connect with others. We are, by definition, as human beings, are social animals. We're not just social animals, we're hyper-social. We're, if we're talking about a species that thrives based on sociality, being connected with others. That's actually what makes us human, which is different from other species. Although other species are equally social, they are not as hyper social as we are. And therefore, the idea of being able, we're born with this basic psychological needs to belong, to relate to others, to cooperate with others, and achieve a sense of community. So achieving those three needs collectively in the aggregate, again, feeds into our sense of life satisfaction, of sense of well-being overall, right? Then we have Martin Seligman, who is essentially the father of positive psychology. And Martin Seligman, he likes to be called Marty. But of course, if you're talking about him, it's Martin Seligman from the University of Pennsylvania. Again, a lot of people think of him as being the father of positive psychology. He wrote a book which is very interesting, which is called Authentic Happiness. What is it to be authentically happy? And his idea is that, okay, and to be authentically happy, you have to have three needs met. You have to have a pleasant life, meaning, what is a pleasant life? You have to have experiences that, in essence, feeds your sensory apparatus, so to speak. Sensory apparatus, your sense of taste. You need to eat. You need to eat pleasant things that are delicious. You need to smell things that are delicious. Has certain kind of aroma, fragrance. You need to hear pleasant things, as in music, right? That's part of the pleasant life. So it's very much related to our sensory organs. And then you also, living a pleasant life is not good enough. In order to be authentically happy, you have to also be engaged. So there is a need for us to drive us to engage in action in a way that leads to goal attainment. And the goal attainment is the thing that, again, makes us happy in different life domains, ultimately happy in life at large. And not only we need to achieve those goals, but those goals have to be meaningful. That means that when we, for example, in terms of work, if you're working in order just to make money, in order to make a living, well, that's somewhat of a meaningful goal. You're supporting your family. But then if you have a career, and your career is based on self-development and personal growth and um, uh, you want to be, for example, your career is to help others, that becomes a little bit more meaningful. You become a physician in order to help people cure themselves, or not the cure, help them become healthier. That's a more meaningful goal, right? So if you have those goals as more meaningful, then there is a need to live a meaningful life through setting goals that are meaningful in life at large. So these are the three needs that drive authentic happiness. What's kind of interestingly, I and a doctoral students many years ago, based right after he came up with this. So wait a minute. Yeah, of course, the need for pleasant life is good. The need for engaged life is good. The need for meaningful life is good. And yes, that makes you authentically happy, but you're missing something that is equally important. And that is the need to have a balanced life. So we came up with a whole program of research on balance. What is the balanced life? And if you can read some of my writing, it gets into work-life balance in a big way. But anyway, that's sort of a tangential topic. Now, talking about authentic happiness, Martin Seligman in 2011 came up with another book, and the book is it's called Flourish. And he said, wait a minute, what I came up with in terms of authentic happiness does not hold, meaning that we do not necessarily have a goal of well-being. It's not an end goal. It's not an end. It's not a desired state of affairs that is what you might call a terminal goal. So then, we tend to make, people who are involved in cultural psychology tend to make the distinction between terminal goals and instrumental goals. So let's say a terminal goal will be self-esteem. I want to feel good about myself, and that is a terminal goal. Making money, it becomes instrumental, an instrumental goal that ultimately would make me feel good about myself, possibly, right? Or educational success, for example, becomes instrumental to self-esteem. But anyway, the point that I'm making is that he's sort of rescinding or renouncing the idea that well-being is a terminal goal, and making the supposition that positive emotions, engagement, relationships, meaning, and accomplishments, these are the end goals. These are the terminal goals. There isn't such a thing as well-being. These constitute the construct, the concept of well-being. So meaning that we are driven to do whatever it takes in order to experience positive emotions, and positive emotions is the terminal goal. We do a whole bunch of different things in order to become engaged, right? Engage in order to achieve certain things. And engagement is a terminal goal. Same thing with relationships. We connect with others, not necessarily because we want to achieve something else, because that is a terminal goal, right? Terminal goal, terminal end state. Same thing with meaning, and same thing with accomplishment. These are terminal desired states. So this whole idea is that flourishing, to experience flourishing in the most positive psychology sense, right, is to experience these things: positive emotions, engagement, relationships, meaning, and accomplishments as end goals. Let's take 10-minute break. Yeah, I think that's a good time to do this. Probably need to go to the bathroom. Well, I do. And maybe a cup of tea or a cup of coffee. We'll see you in 10, okay? Okay, can we reconvene? So to continue with the topic of need and need satisfaction, another theoretical model that has been, grounded in much research is the Carol Reef model of human flourishing. We already talked about that early on when we talked about measures of eudaimonia, which is, again, psychological well-being. And Professor Reef is the first person who developed a solid psychometric measure of psychological well-being, or what she calls human flourishing too, based on several dimensions. And these are self-acceptance, positive relations with others, personal growth, purpose in life, environmental mastery, and autonomy. You can actually construe these as needs. So these are psychological needs. The need to, embrace oneself, to accept one's self in all of one's dimensions, whether faults or both vices and virtues, positive relations with others, personal growth, purpose in life, environmental mastery, and autonomy. So you may want to revisit that measure that we talked about in, I think, in chapter 2, if I'm not mistaken. Move on to, this is another more recent model of human needs and need satisfaction, which is based on a sort of a flip side. So in other words, instead of talking about need satisfaction, you're talking about those needs that are not satisfied. And if they are not satisfied, then of course you experience ill-being. So the focus is very much on the flip side of well-being, meaning ill-being, and talks about, well, everybody needs to have those kinds of needs. And if they're not met, then again, people experience ill-being. So this model is developed by Rojas and Guardiola, if I'm pronouncing it right, again, recently. Receiving comfort and hope, obtaining justice, companionship, not being alone, feeling respected by others, accepted by others, pay and cancel debts, receiving recognition and gratitude, being heard and taken into account, having affection and love in life, having a job. And actually, in one way, you can actually think in terms of these needs as rights. People have rights. And if these rights are not fulfilled, they're not met, then people experience ill-being. So it's a good model, makes sense, and we'll probably see a lot more research coming out of this model in the near future. This is another model that actually is also attracted my attention, and the reason being is because it's grounded in evolutionary psychology, and it's very much based on Maslow's hierarchy of needs. But Maslow's hierarchy of needs is, talks about psychological needs, and this one is grounded more in biology than psychology. Well, it takes into account dimensions of biology and conjoining those with psychological dimensions. So the idea is you have a hierarchy of needs, immediate physiological needs, just in the same way that Abraham Maslow talked about it. Self-protection, again, need for security, affiliation, and status are related to the social needs. But then if you look at mate acquisition, mate retention, and parenting as social animals, right? And being social, we strive to fall in love. We strive to make a family. So again, the whole idea of mate acquisition, mate retention is part of, once you build that family, you need to protect the family in the best way you can. So that is inherently grounded in evolutionary psychology. And the ultimate need that is, a higher level need is parenting. And I love this idea of parenting. Yeah. So all of the what Maslow has been talking about in terms of the growth needs is transformed or translated in a biological evolutionary sense as in parenting. And it makes sense to me. I think it's, the way that we raise our children tend to be very much, we make a lot of sacrifices. We make a lot of sacrifices, in order to raise our children in certain ways as parents. So why would an individual, a social organism, make those kinds of sacrifices rather than stay single? Because parenting involves quite a bit of agony, but also certain joys too. So, I like this model a lot because it's grounded in evolutionary psychology, and those growth needs, tend to be captured in terms of mates acquisition, mate retention, and parenting. Very thought-provoking. Okay, now I'm going to say a few things about goals. And this is something that I've written about, and I have quite a bit of research that I personally done, and it reveals to how goals relate to well-being. And there's quite a bit of research, not only in the psychology of well-being, but coming from personality social psychology on this topic. And the idea is that you can break down this kind of research in terms of what you call goal valence, goal expectancy, goal implementation, and goal progress attainment and non-attainment. And all these facets related to goal theory have something to do with well-being. But let's just focus very quickly on, I'm not going to go through all the dimensions, but goal valence, and that is when you set a goal in life, it is the valence, the valence property, meaning the extent to which it is positive or negative. When the goal is attained, it generates positive or negative feelings. So this is when we talk about valence. The valence of the goal is the extent of its positive or negative inducing affect, right? So the idea then is that if you want to experience a high sense of well-being, then you need to make sure that you set goals for yourself that are high in valence, and more specifically, high in positive valence. Because once these goals are attained, then you would experience a great deal of positive feelings, positive emotions, leading to, again, domain satisfaction and satisfaction with life. And in some ways, you can actually talk about eudaimonic well-being. So the valence of the goal, the positive valence of the goal can be selected, can be set by focusing on goals that are meaningful, goals that are more intrinsic rather than extrinsic, goals that are more abstract rather than concrete, goals that are more related to motivation rather than hygiene, goals more related to approach rather than avoidance, goals related to deprived needs, not necessarily non-deprived. So the more a goal is related to needs that are, that, let's say a person is raised in poverty, it's very likely that he or she will feel financially or economically deprived, and therefore achieving a higher standard of living in life becomes a major goal. And therefore achieving that standard of living, that high standard of living, once that goal is achieved, generates quite a bit of positive feelings, which again leads to an overall sense of well-being. Goals that are set autonomously, rather, if you set those goals rather than be pressured by your parents or by your peers or by the community, then if these goals are set autonomously, then it's likely to generate more positive feelings once the goal is achieved. And goals related to flow. Remember we talked about flow? Flow as in goals related to, that are related to skills that are challenging, challenging skills and tasks. Well, so if the idea then is that you can generate a greater sense of well-being if you set those goals that ultimately will produce positive valence and a high level of positive valence. And the way to do this is by looking at the research related to all those dimensions and apply them accordingly. Not only the goals have to be set in a positive way, but they have to, the expectations related to the achieving or meeting those goals have to be set in certain ways. And if they are set in certain ways, they are very likely to be attained. They are likely that the person is likely to be able to achieve those goals. This is what we talk about in terms of goal expectancies. So in that context, if you set those goals that are adaptable, meaning that if you can't meet one goal, then you'll be able to switch to another goal and you adapt, that's that kind of situation. Adaptable goals lead to a higher sense of well-being than non-adaptable. If you can't meet that goal, you're stuck with it and you feel nothing but failure, then you're doomed. Effects of goals that are congruent with the cultural norms. If, let's say, you live in a communist country and you want to become rich, well, that's the kind of goal that you're not going to be able to achieve, because accumulating wealth is incongruent with the cultural norms of the country. But if you live in a place like the United States, that would be, achieving wealth would be congruent with the cultural norm. And if you'd be able to achieve that kind of goal, then that leads to your sense of well-being. On and on. So there's a whole bunch of theirs, of course, the one that is pretty obvious is realistic goals. Have to be based on, whether you have the resources, the skills, the capability of being able to meet those goals. And if you don't have those resources, then ultimately they are not realistic and you're not likely to achieve those goals. And therefore, you're not likely to experience any sense of well-being. On and on. Goal implementation, and that is in order to achieve those goals and experience a sense of well-being, you have to implement how you go about achieving those goals. And this comes about with goal commitment and persistence. It comes about in terms of thinking concretely rather than abstractly. Other kinds of factors that play in goal implementation would be self-efficacy and optimism. You have to feel confident in your ability to engage and achieve that goal, and you have to be optimistic in terms of the end results and so forth. That helps you with goal implementation. And finally, you also need to recognize, you have to recognize that the goal is attained once it's achieved. So, a lot of people, when they achieve the goal, they don't celebrate this achievement. And celebrating the achievement of the goal is a way to ensure that you experience a higher sense of well-being. That would be just an example of those dimensions. Okay, we ran out of time. So we have the chapter on self-concept and social comparison, which we didn't get a chance to discuss. I'm going to leave that up to you to finish that part. That would essentially be module 3, and we're going to start module 4. And module 4 would be focused on life domains. So we'll talk about work well-being, we'll talk about leisure well-being, we'll talk about economic well-being and what did I say, leisure, family well-being. So this kind of research is contained to a specific life domain, right? So we'll talk about that kind of research. And so we have so much to talk about and so much research. That's the beauty of this, of the field of study that we're in. It is indeed blossoming. It is blossoming and growing by leaps and bounds, which is delightful to us. Okay, let's see. We don't have any questions. So our next meeting, again, will be next Tuesday. And again, we can be focusing on life domains. And that starts with chapter 16 and it goes all the way to chapter 23. If you have any questions, any observations, comments, don't hesitate to email those to me, and I will post the video soon. And for those who are taking this class for certification purposes, I'll be sending you the questions shortly. By the way, I've been enjoying your answers. Most of them are pretty good. So thank you for being diligent and studious. Anyway, so I bid you farewell for now, and I will see you next week. Okay, bye now.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor.
Well, you're very welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye. Bye.